So WP candidate Andre Lo apologized. And according to him, the messages were from a private chat, and many of these dated back to the COVID period when they ranted to each other. According to CNA, the messages leaked on Reddit and Facebook, which showed him swearing about a resident he had called in MPS work, as well as the civil service and fighter jets. Andre Lo also criticized Trace Together, Singapore brands like Secret Lab and Prism, media personalities Pornsak, Prajakrit, and Mark Lee, and tennis player Novak Djokovic. In the messages, he also swore about former DBS CEO Piyush Gupta, property agent Singtel, StarHub, and Apple. Andre Lo apologized to the voters of Jalan Kayu SMC and said he takes full responsibility for his past actions. But looking at this article with no screenshot, no nothing, really doesn't give us any idea of how bad the messages are. So let's look at the Facebook page called Neutral Party. Very interestingly, the first post I see is think twice before voting for opposition. If you scroll down further, wait a minute, is that AI? I thought there was a new law which, according to this The Straits Times article, bans digitally generated or manipulated content that misrepresents a prospective candidate's speech or actions. Anyway, scrolling further down, we find the leaks with the description, what the F, so many F, how the F he is selected by WP. Now, if you look at the Reddit thread, there's an accompanying rant with the leaks. But first, let's find out who this SP Separate 550 is. As of late noon, 30th April 2025, first thing to notice is that the creation date of this account is 26th April 2025, and that the Andre Lo leak is the only thing posted with this account. Two of those posts even got removed by moderators. After the news had already been published in mainstream media, when I went to check the post again late at night while writing this script, the account and post had been deleted. However, the pictures are still on the Facebook post. Regardless, the credibility of the leak is basically zero at this point. So what does this mean? The leak isn't news at all. For all we know, it's completely fake. But before you bring out your pitchforks, let's search Andre Lo in Channel News Asia. Here we see that Andre Lo's leaks only became news because he apologized. In the Straits Times, also the same thing. In Mothership, which is not mainstream media, somehow only two results. But what this tells us is that before Andre Lo apologized, this isn't news at all. Lo chose to apologize before this became anything bigger, and then this became news. One important thing to note, however, is that Mothership links the Facebook posts containing the apology and the leaks. On the other hand, CNA doesn't have any links. And while the Straits Times linked the apology, they didn't link the pictures. So now let's look at the actual leaks and deleted Reddit post. First, SP Separate 550 wrote that Lo's self-portrayal of being empathetic and compassionate made them fall off their seat, and this is hypocritical. Lo complains about residents in the MPS, and in his words, these people can fuck off. Since Lo apologized, we can assume these are real. But according to the chat, Lo says there was a resident who proceeded to call him every day on his personal number after turning off caller ID, and that these people can fuck off. So based on the chat, actually it's not residents, but one resident. We can assume Lo meant type of resident like this one. Then SP Separate 550 wrote that they didn't see any empathy or compassion in Lo's private complaints about local brands, celebrities, civil service, local journalism standards, and fighter jets. That this feels more like hatred and anger. They then urge people to hold integrity to the higher standard, and that they believe there is value in having opposition views in parliament, but it must come from people who are honest and who have genuine empathy and compassion. So let's one by one look at the rest of the leaks. In regards to the civil service, Lo complains that joining the civil service is futile for people wanting to contribute to society and public service before saying fuck the government. What Lo is critiquing here is the unclear impartiality of the civil service, since theoretically they should be political neutral. With Grab, Lo is complaining about career options after retrenchment. It looks like he is implying that Grab drivers are a last resort job for people. So yes, Grab drivers are fucked. With Singtel, there isn't a specific complaint. But put together with StarHub, we understand that the complaint is about prices being too expensive and that there are no good alternatives in Singapore. We can also see that the conversation is cut off at point number 6, which brings into question What else did SP Separate 550 omit? Then, now, the complaint about no renovation in resale flat. Here, Low complains that the previous owners only wanted to do their minimum occupation period, which is a complaint about property speculation. We didn't get Low's explanation for why property agents are bad, but Low did type fuck every type of agent. For tuition centers, the conversation seems to be about why tuition centers are named after people. Low's complaint seems to be about the ego since he asked if the founders are big deals. For Isetan, Low asked how is Isetan still surviving. For Challenger, Low's complaint is about rebadged Chinese OEMs. For Bread Talk, it's about pork floss on a drink being considered innovation. Notably, this isn't even Low's complaint. For Secret Lab, Prism, and presumably Razer, the complaint is about celebrity marketing rather than the quality of the products. He is embarrassed that this is all we have to tout as a success. His complaint is about the lack of innovation in Singaporean entrepreneurship, as these brands do not necessarily make their own products. So we can also see this as an extension of the rebadged Chinese OEM complaint. For banks, OCBC and DBS, Low complained about poor technology implementation and outages. For local celebrities, Low is again complaining about celebrity marketing, presumably on the same basis of high prices and relatively low quality. A simple search for Jamie Teo, for example, would give this article of 12 Cupcakes co-founder Jamie Teo fined $65,000 for underpaying foreign employees for 3 years. So I guess that's what's wrong. The comments to tennis player Djokovic seem a bit harsh, but in context, before public backlash, Djokovic publicly said he was against vaccination. For Apple, the complaint is about overpriced headphones. For Americans, it's not clear, but perhaps it is about combative Americans who thinks the Chinese 那个, meaning that, is nigger. It's not clear what the Israel model is without context. And then for the cup, Low doesn't know that this is an Irish coffee glass. The small looped handle is, at least theoretically speaking, designed so your hand is away from the hot coffee. Obscure knowledge aside, Low questions who still uses 3D glasses in 2022. And the next one, SP Separate 550 has misconstrued Low's complaints about a specific model of airplanes from Boeing. Boeing had to pay $2.5 billion over the 737 MAX, which is a model that caused 2 deadly crashes immediately after entering airline service. So by 7th July 2024, Boeing had agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to defraud the US government for misleading regulators. In the Trace Together complaint, Low says everyone should uninstall it. In 2021, Trace Together was found to have a privacy concern. Private data was being used by the police, contrary to statements made by ministers. On Singapore being an embarrassment, the article reference is in October 2021 when Germany classified Singapore as a high-risk area. This came after media queries about migrant workers who were subjected to different living conditions in Singapore. The BBC in this article pointed out that migrant workers in Singapore had one of the longest periods of confinement in the world. Then Low's next complaint seems to be taken out of context again, as he is complaining about how outbreaks appear out of nowhere in other countries, preferring an isolationist policy. Then the next complaint is about noise pollution, which in this case is coming from fighter jet trainings for NDP celebrations. And the last is complaining about local journalism standards. As even usually pro-PAP Facebook points out, most of these are everyday conversations that most people have. And as we pointed out earlier, a lot of these incidents involve the lives of people, such as the Boeing 737 MAX and the treatment of migrant workers. If anything, I would argue that people should be allowed to say a few fucks here and there for these types of circumstances, especially in a private conversation. Even in the case of less life-threatening issues such as the telco contract prices, most Singaporeans should know of the introduction of low-priced, high-value, no-contract eSIMs that forced the large 3 telcos, Singtel, StarHub and M1 to then greatly reduce their prices. So Andre Low was right, these contracts were too expensive. But perhaps the most damaging to Low's brand as a politician is the MPS work, where he said that people like this one resident should fuck off. My view is that someone who does their job and bitch about patrons at the back of house is better than a worker who doesn't even do their job. And we do know that this was done in a private, trusted friend group rather than, say, Parliament. And you would notice that most of these issues raised by these complaints may be somewhat political or can be aided in some way by politicians, which makes sense. Andrew Low is now a candidate for Workers' Party. And in regards to the vulgarities, this is pretty tame in comparison to what more than half of Singaporeans experience at age 18. I don't even have to use my own experience since on Reddit, there's no shortage of these examples shared by people. Some examples, Tibai, no wonder you're so fucking fat. Look at your own cock until you become gay. And in response to a mean dev video, it is pointed out that there are zero vulgarities, zero tekan, zero urgency. You can say that it is a toxic culture, one that is possibly shaped by leaders within the system, which reminds me of this TUC guy, who happens to be the Chief of Defense Force from 2013 to 2015. It would be funny if it coincided with the time Low served, but I guess not. So the feelings I have about the vulgarities are written by Bertha Henson already, so I might as well just read her post. It just pales in comparison with the silence emanating from TUC guy. NTUC person has put up a rather lame response on how he handled the Income-Allianz deal and seems intent on zipping his lips. Here's the response put out.
Like in 2024, the Income-Allianz deal. The proposed deal was done in good faith and was in compliance with the legal and the MAS regulations. We thought in the labor movement that it was a reasonable deal. Why? Because in the last 10 years, income's market share in Singapore has dropped from 20% to 6%. There was a real threat to the sustainability of income, especially in moments of crisis. The proposed deal could strengthen income and, most importantly, protect the interests of income's policy holders. A stronger income would also enable NTUC to do our social mission in the wide spaces besides insurance. That was our judgment. However, as the details of the proposed Allianz plan surfaced, the government saw it differently and stopped it by changing the law. NTUC, we could not have known that the law would be changed, but we sincerely respected the government's view and accepted it. We humbly acknowledged the public feedback that we have received. I've initiated a review in NTUC enterprises so that we can learn the right lessons humbly, do better for fellow Singaporeans. In NTUC, we will do our best. And sometimes, I'm sorry that it is not good enough. But we will learn the right lessons and we will do better.
So technically there is a sorry in there. But if you saw the letters by ex-NTUC Income and Enterprise CEO Tan Swee Chee, then you probably noticed that current NTUC fella evaded all the questions. The question still boils down to, did Income and its shareholders, including NTUC Enterprise, which holds 72.8% ownership, consider the promise to uphold the social mission of Income? Because Allianz buying a majority stake of 51% sounds like it would make that quite difficult. And you notice that NTUC chap mentioned a decreasing market share. What he didn't tell you is whether Income itself is growing, because you can have a situation where market share is falling but company is still growing. Well, Income shareholders paid $10 per share a long time ago, and they could be worth between $15 to $25 in 2024, depending on who you ask. Simply based on the share price, we can understand that Income grew as a company. But it may not have been a good financial investment. Retail shareholders especially face difficulties in selling these shares as Income is not listed on a stock exchange. So this means that Allianz's offer at $40.58 would have been very attractive. Except there was no guarantee that they would uphold the social mission, considering that Allianz is a for-profit company. And that 1.85 billion capital extraction plan was kind of that extra evidence that the deal maybe wasn't for social purposes. Allianz themselves would also stand to gain from this extraction since they would become shareholders. So in short, the deal was great for shareholders, but nobody except Allianz know if their plans will benefit policyholders. So now going back to Andre Lo, his response just kinda appeared great in comparison when it comes to accountability. But I also want to think out of the box a little here, because the consensus seems to be that this is just some quote-unquote friend who just dulan about Lo complaining so much. But I think it's worth looking into this as foreign interference or that someone's Telegram account got hacked. It's certainly not improbable considering that Income-Allianz is now a high-profile case. And some things are just weird to me about this post, such as the unnecessary pictures of fighter jets and brand logos. A lot of the posts were also punching up, which honestly, I think most Singaporeans won't care. The only thing that could be seen as punching down is the MPS, but even then this was in a private chat and it was done by a resident who essentially abused the privilege of getting access to Lo's personal phone number. So we need to talk about the news articles. The Straits Times reported this as shown. I feel this is fair enough. CNA, on the other hand, I feel, wasn't objective enough. The omission of the details doesn't provide enough context to understand what Andre Lo was angry about. Also note that CNA didn't include Jamie Teo, whose controversy is a lot easier to find online, and they also didn't list Boeing 737 MAX, which killed people. Either way, considering that the leak was not a credible source, I feel that we can compare the Andre Lo leaks to an ex-MOE teacher's experience with a certain education minister. This Instagram post came from Ivan David Ng, an artist from Singapore and based in the US. Since the last slide tells us that this individual lost in a previous election, this is likely to be Ng Chee Meng. Pause and read the details if you want. Ivan David recalls a dialogue session with a minister with his NIE Postgraduate Diploma in Education Programs cohort of about 300 people. He asked a question regarding policy on SAP schools, hoping to get nuanced answers for something established about 50 years ago. After asking the question and returning to the seat, the minister said, "When minister is talking to you, you better stand up." Ivan David returned to the stand, getting an aggressive lecture from the minister. There were murmurings in the crowd, and another person came up to the microphone to supplement Ivan David's answer, only for the minister to say, "You two don't need to conspire against minister, okay?" The minister also said that Ivan David was full of knowledge but lacking wisdom. The minister then asked the cohort how many books they read, and after people raised their hands, questioned if those were fiction or serious books. The minister then reacted with confusion to the loud jeering and sighs from the crowd, which consisted of language and literature teachers. Ivan David ends this post by asking readers to ask other PGDE graduates on confirmation of this story. He says that how leaders treat their junior staff is very telling of their character, and that he doesn't think such an individual should be coming back to parliament anytime soon. In the comments, there is one Alan Lim saying that he thinks this happened 10 years ago, but he is campaigning for this person because he saw his efforts to be a better person. Alan Lim later left another comment inviting Ivan David for a coffee after the elections to meet with Chee Meng.